Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're putting on our comprehensive literary critic hats and tackling a really fascinating question. How do we actually move human experience across the borders of language? We're going to use the Maithili literary e-journal Videha as our guide through all this. You know, we aren't just looking at swapping out words from one language to another. No, we're asking something way deeper. What happens to the fragile human soul during that process? How do translators navigate the incredibly treacherous waters of culture, context, and raw emotion? To keep our intellectual journey structured today, we're looking at 4 key areas. 1. The parallel literary world. 2. Frameworks of translation theory. 3. A case study on translating trauma. And 4. The ultimate test, poetry. Let's get to it. Section 1. The parallel literary world, bridging cultures. Let's step into a space where completely diverse voices are woven into one single tapestry. Now, this specific edition of Videha, issue 28 to be exact, is way more than just a typical anthology. Honestly, think of it more like a living laboratory for literary translation into the Maithili language. It represents this massive, super deliberate effort to synthesize completely different cultural experiences into one highly accessible platform. The editors here aren't just collecting stories, they're literally building bridges between isolated literary islands. And just look at the sheer scope of this undertaking. It's absolutely wild. We're capturing voices ranging from the rich traditions of Telugu short stories and Hindi novels, and then reaching all the way across the globe to Russian and German drama. We've got Odia microfiction, Gujarati poetry, Konkani, Punjabi, Nepali. It is a staggering variety of regional and international human experiences brought directly to the Maithili reader. It just perfectly proves that language really doesn't have to be an impenetrable wall, you know? Section 2. Frameworks of Translation Theory, the Academic Lens. Now that we see the scale of the work, let's equip ourselves with the tools we actually need to critique it. This brings us to a massive, pretty provocative challenge. When you're translating a text, especially one packed with emotion or cultural weight, how do you perfectly move its soul from one linguistic body to another? I mean, how do you keep that raw, beating, emotional heart alive? It's basically the ultimate puzzle for any literary critic, simply because words carry so much more baggage than just their straight-up dictionary definitions. So to answer that, we turn to Roman Jakobson's foundational semiotic theory. He basically argues that interlingual translation is not just swapping dictionary words like you're trading baseball cards. Instead, you're taking a verbal symbol from one distinct cultural code and trying to find its equivalent in a completely different one. You aren't merely translating language, you are actively interpreting profound cultural signs. And that idea leads us right to a cornerstone of our critique today. Eugene Nida and Charles Tabor's concept of dynamic equivalence. Look, if you do a literal word-for-word translation, the result almost always feels super stiff, lifeless, and frankly, culturally blind. Dynamic equivalence, on the other hand, prioritizes meaning-for-meaning resonance. The whole goal is to recreate the original emotional punch for the new target audience, even if the translator actually has to completely change the exact vocabulary to get there. A perfectly local example of this theory playing out in real time is the debate over translation vocabulary right within Maithili itself. Take something as simple as the word for brick. Do you use the earthy, widely accepted regional word inta, or do you go with the Hindi-derived eat? The translator literally has to weigh which symbol will best trigger the exact right cultural memory for the reader, all without losing the text's authenticity. It's this incredibly delicate invisible balancing act of dynamic equivalence happening on literally every single page. Section 3. Case Study. Translating Trauma, Emotion in Practice. Let's see how these theories actually hold up when dealing with visceral, intense human emotions. We're going to apply our critical lens to 2 specific prose pieces from the journal. Both of these stories rely heavily on navigating separated worlds, deep psychological trauma, and some really intense societal tension, and the challenge here is huge. If the translator gets it wrong, the entire emotional weight of the trauma just completely vanishes. Let's see how they handled that immense burden. Let's look at this moment of absolute panic. This is an excerpt from Sheikh Muhammad Sharif's Telugu story, Juma. In it, a mother realizes a bomb has just blasted at the Makkah Masjid where her son went to pray. Just notice how fragmented, urgent, and incredibly heavy with dread this language is. The words need to tumble out with the exact same chaotic, heart-pounding terror as a real-life crisis. And here is dynamic equivalence in pure practice. As literary critics, we can clearly see that the Maithili translation doesn't just feed us the cold, hard facts of the event. Instead, it forces you to feel that mother's suffocating terror, as if it were happening to your own family. The translator successfully maps the specific religious and cultural tensions of the original Telugu right onto the Maithili language, making absolutely sure that the emotional resonance survives completely intact.
Now, we see that exact same critical theory applied to a completely different genre in Dr. Pravakatan's Hindi novel Chinnamasta. This story dives deep into the intense feminist introspection and emotional isolation of Priya, a 48-year-old woman dealing with a broken marriage and societal hypocrisy. And she poignantly describes women as being taught lessons so they never escape this labyrinth of words.
To capture the feeling of that suffocating labyrinth, the translator absolutely had to throw strict literalism right out the window. By prioritizing the emotional sting of the vocabulary over the literal dictionary definitions, the Maithili version perfectly preserves the protagonist's profound alienation and psychological fatigue. It really proves that a truly successful translation carries the soul of the feminist struggle directly across that linguistic border, completely unbroken.
Section 4. The Ultimate Test: Poetry, Rhythm, and Resonance. Having analyzed prose, we've got to face the absolute most difficult medium for any translator.
It begs the ultimate question in literary critique. Can poetry ever truly survive translation? I mean, poetry isn't just about conveying meaning or telling a narrative. It relies entirely on rhythm, meter, and highly localized phonetics. If you change the words, you inherently destroy the music. So, how on earth do you translate the untranslatable? Think of a piece of traditional local art. Just as every single specific line, pattern, and color in a regional painting is deeply, inextricably tied to its cultural origin, every syllable in a poem is meticulously chosen for its exact acoustic property. You can't just repaint it with completely different colors and call it the exact same piece. And the same goes for the localized beauty of poetry. The translators in the Videha journal actually acknowledge this massive hurdle explicitly. When talking about translating the famous Hindi poet Nirala, the notes highlight that the real magic of his work lies in its dense word friendship. You know, the beautiful, specific way those original sounds just rub up against each other, and the phonetic resonance. You absolutely cannot simply swap those words out for synonyms.
This demands what the critics and theorists call parakaya pravesh, which literally translates to entering another's body. To translate poetry, you can't just remain yourself. You essentially must mentally and spiritually step into the original author's soul. They aren't just translating words on a page, they're recreating the entire acoustic and spiritual landscape from scratch in the target language. It's like they're building a brand new instrument just so the original poem can sing again.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, pretty provocative thought. We read translated works all the time, right? We effortlessly absorb different cultures, radical ideas, and profound emotions. But how often do we actually stop to recognize the invisible, painstaking labor of the translators? The next time you're deeply moved by a translated text, just remember the unseen architect, the person who carefully, meticulously carried that fragile human soul across the linguistic divide, all just so you could experience it.